Welcome to Bone, Stone, and Obsidian, a Dark Sun podcast.
I'm your co-host, Jesse.
And I'm Robert.
Today, we're talking about, very exciting, Tale and Claw, the new Dark Sun source book by the Pristine Tower Development Group and Athos.org.
And we'll be talking about it with one of the producers, Henry Giff. Welcome, Henry.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we jump into the book, let's talk about Dark Sun news.
Yeah, so everybody else can hear this music, or just heard it, I should say, except for Jesse and Henry. But we have new intro and outro music. The music is by Philip Melvin, courtesy of describe.com. If you guys have not checked out Describe, it's a cool website. They started as just like they just had little bits of basically box text that you could read to people. And then they just kind of grow and grow and grow. And now they're doing like maps with box text about the locations and music and everything. It's pretty cool. You can make like a whole adventure in that website, which is cool. And so I asked them if I could use some of the music, and they said go for it. So thanks. Also, Jesse started up his Sand Marches game on the Dark Sun Discord, and it's going fantastically. Jesse, give us a quick rundown what it is and how people can get involved.
Thanks. I'll try and keep it brief. We're using the original second edition box set with a bunch of add-ons from the second edition era of AD&D. And this is a collaborative game where all of the players are coming together to build a community out in the endless dunes far in the southeastern part of the tablelands, remote from the city-states. And all of them are refugees for one reason or another and can't go back to the regular city-states. So they have to do their best to make a new life in the middle of the desert. And if that sounds like your kind of good time, just drop into the Dark Sun Discord and look for the Sand Marches channels and say, hey, I am interested in joining the game. And we'll get one of our several DMs to talk to you and set you up with the ability to take a look and to join with a character sheet. So far, so good. We're using the draft of the Sand Marches book, which is still in editing and hopefully will return any day now so that it can be released to the general public through Athos.org.
Yeah, so it's really fun. I've played 2 different characters in there. It's really interesting going back to second edition. It's been quite a few years since we played it. And it's kind of interesting to see sort of like what is fun about second edition, what is not so fun about second edition, and how like later editions tried to fix those things, but sometimes when they fixed those things, they changed the game a little bit. So that's been interesting to play again.
Yeah.
In the Discord, Jarl Thor has been talking to people every weekend, and this Saturday, December 9th, he's talking with Sisane for part 3 of the Sundered Regions, the Dark Cupola. He's also sent me 2 sessions with Chris Moneymaker that I need to get on the feed. And that reminds me, like, how does everybody like that? If you like these, I kind of just threw them on there, and people that were in the Discord and stuff knew they were there. But for everybody else, I just sort of threw them on there. So did you like them? Did you not like them? Let us know. You can email us at obsidian@athos.org.
The great thing about Dragon Talk is that while BSO is sort of your news and features podcast where we do specific dives on new products and upcoming Dark Sun information, Dragon Talk is an opportunity for the entire community to meet up and chit chat and talk over each other on Discord. So get your voice heard.
One of the things I've wanted to do that we've never really done is just like, if you guys have questions or comments or anything about the podcast, things you want to know about Dark Sun, you can email us at, again, obsidian@athos.org.
Continue with the Athos.org news then. So obviously we've got the special feature here, Scale, Tail, and Claw. And there's a reading of the first part of it available now through Bone, Stone, and Obsidian. And if you like that, please let us know on social media, and we can do more of that sort of thing. Tell us what you enjoy, and we'll do it again.
So there's been a ton of stuff on the website, as usual. Adam Cieslak has kind of taken over for me putting stuff up, and he's very consistent, which is fantastic. Most recently, he wrote The Encounters of Athos, which is Curious Tales, Tails. It's the latest in a series designed to provide DMs with encounter or location ideas to add flavor to their campaigns. In this installment, Adam focuses on encounters involving the reptilian races of Athos. So he uses the stuff from Scale, Tail, and Claw into this encounter. So if you want to check it out, you can. There's a bunch of cool NPCs.
Yeah, it's a good connection with Tail, Skill, and Claw coming out now so that you can really underscore to players that, oh, you are living in a world with intelligent dinosaurs, in case you had forgotten. In addition, Lawful Stupid blog has done a repost of the Templar extortion system, and this is great because it's really useful aid for the DM to figure out, okay, how much money is a Templar actually going to try and squeeze out of somebody, and what sort of penalties are you likely to encounter if you don't pay a Templar an appropriate bribe. And this is always a hard spot I have found for DMs is a player goes, oh, I want to bribe this guy, or maybe you get a PC Templar who's like, I want to shake this guy down for a bribe. What is realistic amount? How much do I need to pay this guy to pay him off? And it doesn't look suspicious, but it's not insulting. Or how much do I think I can get out of this laborer without making it clear that I'm just asking for something he can never pay, or asking so little that he's just like, sure, and he gives me the money and doesn't think twice about it. And this is a short little article with a couple of tables and some useful guidance for exactly those situations. So when you want to put your players over the barrel in a city-state, look it up.
There's been a couple of Athasian survey projects, one from Terran Vale and another from New Jack, but there must be one in between because it says 22 and 20 and a half. I think the 21 was actually a Josel one. I don't know why I didn't put it in there, but I'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, Josel and Terran Vale obviously go well with the Gale, Tail, and Claw release. Seelick is near and dear to my heart because I was in a game briefly where Seelick was used as a stand-in for the old Pool of Radiance adventure because same sort of premise. You've got an ancient city, part of it's ruined, part of it's inhabited. There's a powerful sort of guild organization that oversees the area that's inhabited and is paying people to go and reclaim other areas from dangerous monsters. It makes for just some great directed adventuring for Dark Sun.
So Heroes of Nibene, this is a article by Valentin Polasek. Sorry if I butchered your name. The tale of one party's playthrough through the adventure Marauders of Nibene. I read this and I thought it was a great article and just a great kind of overview about running the game and what your players do. You know, how is that different than when you're reading it? Like, what are the differences? It's always cool. I would encourage other people to send in their playthroughs to post on there too. I would love to read some more of that.
Absolutely. One of the neat things that I liked about this playthrough report is that in addition to giving a sort description of how the adventure went, there's a section at the end that's kind of the fallout of the adventure. For those who've read Marauders of Nibene, spoilers for a 30-year-old adventure, it's basically a zombie apocalypse strikes the city of Nibene, and then in dealing with it, you come across a disembodied entity that becomes a threat to the city, and that gets dealt with. But in the process, Nibene has sort of like a moment, of reflection where he's like, this wouldn't have happened if I had done X, Y, and Z a little bit differently, and it encouraged him to engage in a little bit of self-reflection and maybe lifting the boot a little bit off of the neck of the people. And so as a result of this, various events were set in motion, and they cover this sort of fallout at the end of the article. Like, okay, how does this affect the political climate in Nibene? What's going on with other city-states in terms of their relations to this crisis that happened and how Nibene's behavior has changed as a result. And that's all really cool stuff to see because it gives you great ideas. Like, if I want to add this to my campaign and I'm going to keep running and not just use it as a one-off, what are some of the repercussions that this is going to have on the rest of the world?
Mm-hmm.
In addition, we've got a new expanded random encounters repost of Rocky Badlands. And these, of course, are, okay, your players are engaging in some overland travel. You rolled a 1 on the random encounter roll. And what did you find? And the expanded random encounter tables that these generate give you like a little bit of extra juice for some of these encounters. So it's not just, okay, you run into some giant scorpions or some cactus. There are a little bit of other twists on them from time to time.
Yeah, they're good stuff. In the Facebook group, there's been a lot of conversations and people posting cool pictures of their Dark Sun games, so check those out. I love seeing people's tables. People have had the digital tables and things like that.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot of content as the group continues to grow. Luke Swadling made some ceramic coins that look fantastic and made an awesome Weather miniature of the giant sort of flying ant slash wasp type creature. Those are horrifying, of course, because they implant you with eggs like an alien. Ugh.
It's such a good miniature. He said it's called like the Hell Wasp, I think it was, which is like one of
Yeah.
the Nolzur's. What are they called? Nolzur's something miniatures. So the D&D miniatures that are unpainted. So you got to paint it, and he did a fantastic job on the paint too.
Yeah. I agree. I love that he has a picture where he's got a warrior for scale, and you can see this is
Yeah.
probably going to be a nasty fight.
Also, I was messing around with Canva, and Canva is like an art program. Basically, you make a bunch of I mean, you can make tons of stuff with it, but it initially started as like social media posts, but you can do so much more with it. And I made an animated Dark Sun logo. So as I was just like scrolling through looking for something else, I was looking for animated suns for a different thing, and it wasn't a sun, but it was like an animated skull and crossbones. And so I just saw like the top of the head, and it was like burning. And so I grabbed the logo, where just the part that says Dark Sun, and I kind of put it over the skull, and then got rid of all the extraneous stuff around it. So now it kind of looks like it's burning, which I thought just looked cool.
Oh, it's so hot. I wish that I could put this on the cover of Stand Marches, but that, of course, is just a book.
Actual plays. So Blue Box RPG, Sea of Dark Sun, still going on. Number 20, For Some the End, it was called. That's ominous. I know that I don't think they've played quite as much lately because of holidays and whatnot. So if you haven't checked it out recently, you can still catch up.
Mysteries of Athos has a second edition actual play that's still going on, and they're on their chapter 13 in Balak, or the Balak area, Heart of the Antloid Nest. So that sounds like a bad place for players to be.
Also, Rime of the Frost Maiden for Dark Sun is continuing. They are on Weird Ways of the Warplings. And if you want to know what that is, there is a conversion, and we will post a link to that as well.
Yeah, it's always cool to see these sorts of conversions where someone goes, okay, what if I take this adventure idea and I put it into Dark Sun? Because obviously Rime of the Frost Maiden is all focused on being in the cold, and so you flip it, I presume, and you're out in the desert with a bunch of little towns around, who knows, a silt pond or maybe even an oasis. I remember seeing that there was someone who had converted Kingmaker, the old Pathfinder adventure, to Dark Sun. So a lot of interesting things you can do by taking these ideas and then giving them a Dark Sun flavor. And now we've got something new, which is audience questions and comments, viewer mail. Someone actually liked something they heard so much that they wrote to us about it. That's kind of new.
So Andrew McLaren wrote to us, and he, thanked us for the episode about Raiders of Canth. He says the nuggets of useful ideas such as levitating windsurfer boards and psionic brain in a jar are awesome, and I hope to include them in my campaign. There were also a couple of other emails, although they were older, which I had missed somehow. And one of them said, I think it was like from the first one that you were on, Jesse. And the guy was like, I really like Jesse. He really had good stuff to say, so make sure he's on more. And I was like, well, it's a good thing because he's been on there a lot.
Right. Wow. Turns out we do listen to user mail. Yeah. Yes, send your messages to us. If there's things that you particularly liked or stuff that you want to talk about, let us know. Let's get to the main event.
Scale, Tail, and Claw. Such a cool name.
Claw. Welcome, Henry.
Hey, thanks so much, guys.
Tell us about Scale, Tail, and Claw. What is it? How did you conceptualize it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an old school book in a lot of ways. It's kind of like one of the complete handbooks that they used to do back in the day. Like that was very much the inspiration. Was could we do like a cool complete? We struggled for a while to figure out what to call it, but it was kind of like the complete reptilian peoples of Athos handbook. And when we started talking about it, and people just had so many ideas because Athos is such a it's this world where the reptilian people make so much sense, and so many of the monsters are reptilian, but as PC races they never really got much development. And so people just had so many ideas that we realized pretty early on that there was enough like excitement about this idea and enough creativity on the team at the Pristine Tower Development Group that we could do something really cool here and like really flesh out all these different reptile races that, they're part of the Dark Sun world already. They just weren't statted out for PCs. And so we realized we had something like really cool and very Dark Sun that we could do here.
Yeah, it is a great book. I wrote a couple of parts of it, so I was super excited to work on it. At the beginning of the book, there is a cool introduction, some journal entries. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to have like a narrative frame for it. And so we had the idea of like a Torquine anthropologist who was, and I'll tell you why we did that in a second, who was looking at the world. He had gone on an expedition and he'd come across some different types of reptilian people. And he realized that they weren't like very well categorized or studied. And so the narrator of the story, this Torquine guy, gets in his head, like, I've got to figure out what's the deal with all these different reptilian people. And it was kind of like a metaphor for what we were doing as we were like going through all the stuff that had been written about the reptilian people and like giving them the attention that they'd never gotten before. And I really like the idea of having it come from the Torquine narrator because it's part of what I think is so cool about this book is it gives you like a different way to play on Dark Sun because all the reptilian peoples, like, they go into the cities sometimes. They're a presence there a little bit, and sometimes in a book you'd see a picture of one of them in a market or something like that. But for the most part, they're out in the desert. They're out in the wilds. They're engaging with the planet in a completely different way, and so it kind of gives you like this whole new frame to run different sorts of adventures in different sorts of places. And so it kind of made sense to have the Torquine be the narrator rather than like a human in one of the cities, because the idea is that the humans have kind of been oblivious to how important reptiles are on this planet. And so it kind of makes for a fun, and there's a fun little story if you read them all about his expedition learning about all these different reptile peoples.
This book is over 200 pages long, so it is a meaty chunk of material. How long did it take you to get all of this together?
I guess we worked on it for about a year and a half. I don't remember exactly when we started, but it definitely would have been 2021. Well, maybe it was I don't know exactly. About a year and a half, I think. Maybe close to 2 years. We had the idea. It came out long because it's kind of like it's like Thrycreen of Athos or Elves of Athos. It takes like a pretty more detailed look at these races. It talks about their society and culture and their biology and all sorts of stuff about them. And so, we were doing it for 9 different reptile species. So, as a book, it came out pretty big. But when you think about its 9 species, it's about 20 pages per species. It's pretty manageable. There's a lot of cool ideas that we had for all these things that we developed. But, it's actually it's a big book, but it's, I think, manageable too.
And all of that comes with the idea that you sort of hinted at before of the reptilian anthropomorphic spectrum, this concept that there's an entire side of humanoid-ish life, like 2 arms, 2 legs, upright for the most part, but based off of a reptile tree as opposed to a mammalian tree. Are there specifics about this idea that you would like to elaborate on, and were there any character types that didn't make the cut under this idea?
Well, yeah. So I mean, the 9 races, right? So it's the Jojal, which are the these guys are just. I mean, these are the least humanoid. These are like one of the least humanoid things that you've ever seen as a PC race, right? Like they're really just little lizards. They're not even little men. They're really just little lizards who are intelligent. And then we had the Tortles, which are kind of So our take on the Tortle, it was they're actually basically Drix, right? So there was this idea that Hamanu experimented on these turtle-like creatures, the Drix, and created the Hydrix, which were bipedal turtles, people, kind of. So there's like already out there in the canon this idea of a bipedal turtle. And so we made that the Tortle. It's, obviously in a lot of campaign settings, turtles are kind of dopey. And these guys are based more on snapping turtles. They're really angry, crazy, very reptilian. Then we had the Silt Runners, who are basically basilisk lizards, but they run across the silt. We had Sarans, which are kind of Gila monsters. We had the traditional D&D race, the lizard folk, which were mostly wiped out. Then we had the Nikal, who are, have such little attention in most official materials, but are actually a very interesting race. And you see them in a couple of places where they do show up, interacting very comfortably with people. And so, kind of the idea as we went through these races was that the more human you get, the more you kind of might have encountered them, and the more reptilian they were, the more obscure they might be to people of the Tablelands, or, to people who'd been playing Dark Sun for a long time. They might not have given these guys the attention they deserved. Then we did the Dre, who are, obviously introduced in City by the Silt Sea and all of that. We had kind of a different take about them. We can talk about that in a little bit. We had the Tyrans, the Pteranodon Min, that were the only one of these that were ever like officially given PC stats. They were in the revised box set. And then finally the Wanti, the serpent people who are infiltrating cities, living right among humans all the time. Got an ulterior agenda, obviously, but they're right there in human cities. And so it was just kind of a cool way to organize the book and think about the races. In terms of the question of like what didn't make the cut, we really covered the races that have gotten attention in Dark Sun. We talked a little bit about Giff, but we decided they're not really part of the ecological niche. We talked a little bit about the Verini, which are like a fire newt people that showed up in one of the computer games, but we felt that was a little too tenuous. So we stuck with these 9 and felt like we did a pretty comprehensive job of looking at the really interesting reptile races.
Very nice.
This book is split in 2. There's a player's guide section and a DM's guide. What brought that particular layout?
It was a couple of things. I mean, one is like it's a very, you used to always buy your player's handbook in your DMG, and you had a lot of the same you had a lot of overlapping information in one, from one to the other, but part of it was kind of meant to be kept secret. And we realized that there was like a very compelling reason to do that for some of these races. 2 in particular, the lizard folk and the Dre, because both of these races are really, like their very existence is a huge spoiler. And the way the Dre are often presented, so this is why we did a 3rd generation of the Dre. It's like the way the Dre are often presented is, it says, this is like in the City by the Silt Sea, there's a handout for Dre player characters, and I think it starts saying something like, the Dre were created by Dregoth and New Gilstinel, and it spoils like one of the biggest surprises that they ever created for the Dark Sun campaign setting. And people have done like versions of the Dre race, and they put all that lore, which is like surprising stuff that even the Sorcerer Kings don't know, and they just put it right in the character creation materials. And so we wanted to do a player's version of all these races that was completely free of spoilers. So nothing about if you read the player's guide, you won't hear anything about Dregoth or champions or the Last Sea or Mind Lords, because that's stuff that the DM. We wanted DMs to have the ability to keep that as a surprise, because some of that's some of the coolest stuff that was ever created for Dark Sun, and we didn't want it to be ruined in session 0. And then we did the DM's guide so that we could still talk about those things, but make it so it was handled kind of like in a spoiler-free way, so you could actually give that part of your book to players, and then have the stuff for the DMs who are actually running it and using these secrets. And I think it came out like a really cool way to do it.
Let's get into the player's guide. So, we're probably just going to kind of skip through things, otherwise it will take us forever. We'll just kind of go quickly through each one. So the Josel are one of the ones that I wrote, and that one was interesting because as I was writing it, it just sort of took on a life of its own a bit. And so in the regular Josel, there are, you don't really have a whole lot of information about them. And so as I was writing them, it just sort of naturally like diverged. Like there was 2 different kinds of Josel. Like these tree Josel. I was looking up lizards and like what their anatomy does and things like that. And one of them had their tail wrapping around a tree. and they use that for support in the tree. And I was like, that's awesome. These things are small, they could be in some trees and stuff. So they kind of diverged that way. And then just the idea of these things running kind of like across the sand, kind of like the basilisk lizards run across water, that same sort of thing. So they don't really get caught up in the dunes. They just kind of run on top of them. And I really like the idea that Josel like mostly live in families. Like they're pretty much concerned with their family, and like they know there are other kind of Josel families out there, and they'll work together. But like instead of like the city state or the village being like the main social aspect, it's the family. And so I wrote all this stuff up, and then Jack and Izar and Henry really made it shine. So thank you for that. You have any thoughts about the Josel?
Well, no, but we should stop and like talk about the art for just a second too, because one of the things that makes this book so cool is it is full of original art, and I think some of it is some of the coolest stuff since the original run of the Bram and Baxa art. The other lead coordinator on this book, Izhar Ben Yosef, is an illustrator, and he drew pictures of all these races that are so incredibly cool. And the other guys that did the art for this, Scott Harshabarger drew a lot of the races. He drew an awesome picture of a Jojal. Justin Tothel is the guy who did a lot of the encounter maps that are really cool in this book. And Gabriel Eggers did, first of all, he does these amazing maps that we use throughout the books. And then he also did great art of all these original weird lizard weapons. And then new Jack Meyer helped out a lot on the graphics and stuff as well. And it's a visual feast. And so one of the things, like, even if you're if you're a little skeptical of these lizards, you start looking at this art. I think people will get really psyched about it because the art that these guys did is so incredible.
It is really good. There's a ton of different pieces of art. You've got a bunch of different subtypes. You've got that comparison shot of all the different lizard folks and reptilian types standing next to each other. There's even some adventure maps and pieces of equipment. It's really a full-featured book.
All right, let's move on to turtles. You kind of mentioned them originally a little while ago. Do you have just any other thoughts about them?
Well, this was a tricky one because it's not this is the only one that's not in the Dark Sun canon at all. It's a race that I don't, had it been introduced in 2E days? I don't even know, but certainly it wasn't ever included as part of Dark Sun. But some people have introduced it in their own, have introduced it on their own because a reptilian turtle person. There's kind of a logic to it, but a lot of people had kind of like a reluctance about it because a lot of turtles are, like I said, like they're just kind of dorky and they're kind of like mopey dopey turtles, and so we wanted to do something totally different, totally Dark Sun. And I think what got everybody excited about it was when we realized that this whole thing where the Sorcerer Kings have been experimenting on turtle eggs, trying to create war lizards. What if that experiment had gone wrong and led to this race? That was like such cool inspiration and made it such a Dark Sun race that we felt really excited about it. I mean, it's kind of the same origin story as Half Giants, actually, right? They were experiments to the Sorcerer Kings and became their own race, and so turtles were the same, but very alien to because they were so outside of the canon. We had the idea that they had mostly fled from the Tur region and had set up a civilization far away, on the shores of the Silt. We put them in the ruined city of Arala. Which is mentioned in the books because it's where the floating head guy Sacha is from, and we put them there because we've just felt like, these aren't in any official materials. People aren't going to want to see these running around Nibene, but maybe they'll accept it if we make them snapping turtle people way out in the middle of the silt, and I think it came out really cool.
For sure. One of the things I love about them is the turtles of a different shell section. It's a short section, but when we were first kind of talking about what we were going to do, there are a couple of turtle-like creatures in Dark Sun, the Kathrang and the Flailer. And so those were sort of natural first things to do. But I don't even remember who came up with the idea of the the Drick turtle, but once that came on, I think everyone was on board for that.
Yeah, having these different subtypes of turtles that connect directly to turtle-like creatures in Dark Sun is great for adding them to the milieu and making it so that they make sense in the context of the existing kinds of things we have in Athos. Historically, the turtle appears in the creature catalog for basic D&D, and I believe this is from 1986. And there they are just a monster that you can run into, but they're lawful and not necessarily hostile. They usually live in swamps and woods, and they have, a big shell, and they like using crossbows for some reason. They get more of a write-up, and they become player characters in second edition, originally in the Red Steel campaign setting. And so that's where they start really coming to the fore as, oh, this is something that you could play, and they get a little bit of development. But Red Steel didn't have a lot of publications, so there was never a huge like a deep dive into turtle culture and physiology the way that you guys did.
All right, let's keep moving. So from turtles, we get to silt runners. Tell us about them.
Well, silt runners are an interesting one because they're like the unforgettable, based off the basilisk lizard that can on Earth can run across the water. And it was like you were saying for the JoJo, like we took a lot of the inspiration for all of these things from the behaviors and biology of real lizards on Earth. We used that as heavy inspiration for a lot of these races. And there's like a description in the Silt Runner thing about how they run. And it's based entirely off the physiology of how an actual basilisk lizard runs across the water. We kind of leaned really heavily in this book on that theme that the lizards are this way for the most part because they're responding to an ecological niche. Like I think that's one of the coolest things about Dark Sun was it was always this world where the entire world had been destroyed by Defiler magic, Sorcerer Kings, the dragon, and it was a world that had responded to that. It had become a desert, and so we ran with that theme that all these people, our inspiration when we didn't have it from official materials was always from what do real lizards do in the animal kingdom, and it makes these races I think feel really authentic and kind of plausible. We didn't hand wave anything and say, oh, they just do it by magic. Everything was based off kind of real biology, and so we did that with the Silt Runners, and I think it came out really cool. The challenge with them, the interesting thing about them is originally when they were introduced in second edition, they had a movement rate of 48, which is really just bananas. It's 4 times as fast as a human. It's 8 times as fast as dwarfs and halflings were. And so, it'd be pretty weird to run a PC at that sort of speed. But we came up with ideas on how to handle that, and I think they're an interesting race. And it'd be like somebody said it would be like playing like a crazy desert version of Sonic the Hedgehog. And I think that's kind of how you'd have to approach it if you were going to do these guys as a PC.
One of the neat additions of the Silt Runners is that you have some idiosyncratic weapons for them that focus on their ecosystem, like what materials are going to be available to them and how are they going to turn these into weapons that these small but extremely quick people can use when they're having to gang up on larger interlopers. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, we had them use like super lightweight spears that are made out of kind of like a bamboo or a reed that grows right on the shoreline. We had them have these trippers they use silt horror tentacles to basically build something that they can use to tangle up people's feet. We had them have like a silt bomb that they throw. That's actually inspired by their version in 4th edition, where the Silt Runners had kind of unique combat roles, and one of them was somebody who causes a lot of distractions all the time. So we thought silt bombs would be a cool way to do that. So it ends up being a fun race that, despite the weirdness of playing like a tiny, not very intelligent, traditionally extremely fast lizard man, there's actually a lot you can do with it.
Well, moving from the Silt Runners, you go next to the Surans. And these are another one that have 3 different subspecies with some variety of phenotypes and weapons. They look more kind of like they were inspired by iguanas, iguanodon type creatures. Tell us a little about them.
Yeah, the three different versions is actually inspired by something that I learned from this podcast, which was when you guys interviewed Tim Beach, who'd done Thrycreen of Athos. He talked about how the different subspecies of Thrycreen were based off different artists having drawn the Thrycreen a little bit differently. And so we kind of did the same thing with the Surans, where the different species are based off the Tui interpretation, the way they were later drawn in 4th edition, and then they've been recently introduced in 5th edition in some Spelljammer books, I guess. And so the different versions are based off of that, and they're a very cool, very Dark Sun monster. They're lizards that can tolerate extreme heat, and so they make their home near the magma. And there's a lot you could do with that, right? There's all these places on Dark Sun, the Lava Gorge, the Valley of Dust and Fire, some ideas in the broader, like the extended fan maps that are full of magma, where it'd be really useful to have these guys either as part of your party or as your guide. So they're a really cool race, and then also they're a very trade oriented race. So there's a lot you can do with that too. So I think this was just a great Dark Sun race that it was like a shame with all of these we felt like, wow, what a shame they never got a chance to develop these, because they had so much potential and so much good ideas around them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great illustration, like you were saying about the art earlier too, of a couple of Surans that have their young in their throat pouches, or one of them's using the throat pouch to carry some items that he's found. So it's amusing, but also very illustrative. So that was pretty cool.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So yes, very cool. The art is fantastic. One of the things I want to call out that's really funny is the Suran tail weapons are so cool. There's a whip, there's razors, there's a sling. And when we were trying to figure out like what do we call these, like tail blades or whatever, it didn't really sound great. And I threw in the chat like the Far Side joke about
the Thagomizer.
The Thagomizer, that's exactly right. And so that's what it ended up sticking. So their tail things are called the Thagos.
We'll see if we can get that old Far Side comic onto the show notes. But basically, they have a name for the spiky tail on a dinosaur becomes the Thagomizer because it killed Thag, and so that became the Thagos for the Suran tail weapons. And there's a nice illustration of basically a bunch of axe blades tied onto a tail, and boy, I would not want to get hit by that.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention that we've not talked about, but I think all of the races have it, is there's little bits and pieces of like their myths and their beliefs and things like that. So there's a lot of little stories and little call outs that I think are awesome, that just add a lot of flavor to them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always been in modern design sort of that fraught problem of conflating culture with species, but in Athos, so many character types are so fragmented and have lost so much that often there's just small enclaves of them left, and they retain some piece of cultural identity, and that's it. It's not like you're going to find these widely diverse, different cultures of reptile folk all over Athos. You're going to find small enclaves of these people surviving in their preferred biomes, and then that community is going to have a way of doing things. So all of the flavor of those communities and their anthropology is included. And I really, really did like how many of these have an eye toward, okay, where do these people live? Their biology informs their home territory, and then the resources available in their home territory inform their culture, their weapons, their practices, how they build homes, how they get food. So that was all very well thought out.
All right, up next is the lizard folk. What did we do with these?
Well, so these are in the official books, right? So the story is that there's lots of spoilers in the podcast. No spoilers in the players section of the book, but lots of spoilers here. Is that these guys were targeted in the Cleansing Wars. by Celtus, who later became the Evangelii, but they secretly had survived under the protection of the Mind Lords of the Last Sea, who placed them into stasis so that Celtus didn't know they were still alive. Technically, they weren't alive. They were in stasis. So there's this whole backstory about them. And according to the kind of the books, they only lived in the last sea area that was controlled by the Mind Lords. And so it's kind of tricky to figure out at first, like, is there any way we can salvage this idea and still use it in this book? And we had the idea that, look, the wards that the Mind Lords had set up are starting to fail. That's just part of the book, is that they're starting to fail. And, the idea is that maybe people are sometimes able to sneak in to the Mind Lord's domain. And so we said, but you know what? Maybe people are sometimes sneaking out. Maybe some lizard folk have gotten out. And so we left it a little vague about how exactly there might be lizard folk kind of out in the world. So we went with the idea that the lizard folk, they're out in the world. They don't know exactly necessarily how they got there. They're under extreme survival pressure. That was kind of the key theme for this race, was that it is a race that has been pushed to the very brink of extinction, but is still hanging on. And so we developed kind of their social structures and their behaviors and even their biology around this idea of extreme pressure. And so we developed the idea that the lizard folk, because their survival pressure is so extreme, are sometimes able to switch their biological sex, because this is something that real lizards do sometimes when they're under extreme survival pressure. And so we thought, this is like an interesting, cool thing to make these guys really stand out and be something unique and different. This race that's barely clinging to the world and is willing to do anything to survive.
It's a Jurassic Park plot too, so you can't go wrong with that.
I didn't think about that, but that's right. Changing the frog DNA got into him.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, we, of course, previously had an interview with Matt Forbeck about his work on Mind Lords of the Last Sea, and the fact that there are still lizard folk there sort of looms large, because there's a body of water that is large enough to actually support the existence of these creatures that are amphibious. But like you were saying, due to the survival pressures that they're experiencing, lizard folk are probably going to undergo some changes. The ecosystems of Athos are not friendly to them, and they have some catching up to do now that they are back out.
All right, moving on, we get into the Nikal, and this is the other race that I did. For some reason, I've always used them in my campaigns. Like, there's almost always a Nikal trader or something. I don't know. There's something about them that I really like. Just their look, their kind of sleek look. And so I was really excited to do this. And this is one of those ones that, I feel like I wrote like maybe half of it, really, because so much of what we were talking about, I don't know if it was you, Henry, I don't remember who, but someone came up with the idea of brumination, which is, when we're talking about all the lizards and kind of what their biology is, this is one of the things that popped up. And it's basically like going into torpor, right? Like
it's similar to hibernation,
or they go into kind of stasis or whatever. And so I really love that idea that they are traveling around, and every once in a while, like, they will go to somewhere in the mountains, and someone will go up to somewhere and disappear into sort of like a monastery, and maybe at some point some Nikal comes out that has been sleeping for 300 years. And so I just love the idea of like all this knowledge kind of being passed back and forth, and the idea of like Athos changing while they are in brumination.
With each of these races, we tried to, stick close to what had been written about them. And the Nikal, they had so little written about them. But they're one of the races that Troy Denning, like, he puts them on. There's like a Nikal that gets killed in like on the second page of the Verdant Passage, and it's obviously a race that he had ideas for. One of the things that I took a lot of inspiration for in this book was when Troy was on the podcast, he talked about how when they designed the world, they originally didn't want to do any of the traditional races. They wanted to only do races that were suited to Athos. And so I kind of always viewed this as an homage to that idea that we were finally had the chance and the freedom to go out and develop the races that are the true inheritors of this world. And so we wanted to make the Nicol kind of rooted in what was written about them, but there was so little written about them. Their monstrous manual entries only like half a page. And so we developed two really big ideas off very thin pieces of information. The reason for the brumation is actually because in the original Monstrous Manual, they have a movement rate of 10 instead of 12. And so we looked at that and we thought, well, maybe something weird is going on with their metabolism. And we started reading about lizard metabolisms and came up with this idea that under certain conditions, lizards can slow their metabolisms even further. And so we really based that whole idea with just running off the fact that they have a movement rate of 10 instead of 12, which honestly might have just been a typo because I don't think anything else had a movement rate of 10. But we just ran with that idea. The other thing that we made for the Nicol, which is really cool and which is based on the books actually, is this idea that they have a very musical and dance-oriented culture and that they do sort of psionic hypnosis with their music. And this is actually based off a passage in the Amber Enchantress book where Sidira comes across this dancing festival. And one of the races in the dancing festival is Nicol. And they're not specified in the book as the central race, but we thought, wow, that's interesting that they're in there dancing, playing music. It's one of the only things we have about this race, so we have to develop the idea. And so we have this really interesting, really intriguing set of ideas around Nicol bards who use music along with psionics to hypnotize people. And it took something where there wasn't a lot of information to start out with, and I think made it into something really cool.
Agreed. The other thing that I liked was the talk about sort of the looping family structures, because you might have a Nicol that enters brumation for a couple of centuries, and then it meets this other older Nicol after waking up and discovers that's like its great-grandchild who's been awake longer than they have. And you can get some very unconventional character stories out of that. You could have a Nicol who potentially has been in brumation for decades or maybe even centuries if the DM is fine with it, and who's like lived in earlier times and remembers things about places from the past.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Moving on from the Nicol, we go to the Dre, third generation. I guess Dregoth has decided he's just going to keep doing it until he gets it right.
Well, so like I said, we had two ideas. One is that we wanted to find a way to make this race suitable as a PC race. But if you go by the kind of original lore, the first generation Dre were failures, and they only lived in Cragmorta, which was an underground city under Giustinal. And then there were the second generation Dre, which Dregoth liked, but they only lived in New Giustinal. And neither of them really made any sort of sense as a PC race, certainly not in a party of other races. I mean, maybe you could do like a Dre campaign that starts in New Giustinal. I don't know. I think it'd be pretty strange. And so we wanted to have a way to have Dre on the surface, out there in the world. It makes sense for them to be a PC race. And this is kind of how they were presented in 4th edition, as they were kind of out there in the world. And so we hit on the idea of having there be a third generation of Dre. And the idea for the third generation of Dre is that they were created by accident when first and second generation got together, that it led to the third generation that kind of blended the characteristics of those two. But, to be honest, I think you could also take this idea and apply it to first generation Dre who are exiles and don't know their background. They've been cast out of their homeland. They've been shunted off by their creator, and they've abandoned their history. That's kind of, I think, the key thing that you need to use this as a PC race out in the world. And so, I mean, a lot of the Dre were really well developed in the original books. There just wasn't a way to make them a PC race, and so we came up with this as a way to make them a race that's actually suitable for player characters.
Very nice.
And there's cute baby Dre.
Ajar's art on this is so good. He drew the whole Dre life cycle where you see him from baby to toddler to grown up, and
Right, yeah.
it's so much of the art is such a delight. Really, if you hate all the ideas I'm saying about lore or whatever, get the book for the art because the art is so great.
Right. The life cycle is pretty cool. I liked the one on page 63 as well in the combat section where the Dre's got those long horns that bend down below his jawline that are, very reminiscent of like black dragon horns or whatnot. It was just very cool.
You mentioned that they kind of turned their back on their history. So like, what drives them?
Well, they're kind of like they have a chip on their shoulder about everything that's gone down, and they're kind of they think they're great, and they're kind of angry that people don't recognize that. And so you can we for each of these races we actually have role playing suggestions, which is just kind of a list of ideas of what kind of motivations might a player character of this race have. It's really just intended as food for thought, right? And for Dre, we talk about that. We talk about, maybe your player has a chip on his shoulder and he's trying to prove to his other companions, that he's the greatest, or kind of running with the chip on their shoulder as a key part of their driver. Just like this fiercely proud, it's just kind of imagining that tension of a fiercely proud people who know they've been exiled by their creator and kind of what that would do to you psychologically. I think there's like a lot of cool ideas you could riff on with that.
Absolutely.
Definitely. All right. Now we move on to Terrans. So as you said before, Terrans were already in the books. So what did you do to them?
Well, this was another Ajar idea where, well, first of all, they've been depicted slightly different ways in some of the different art, and so we had the idea for subspecies to start out with. But then Ajar had this idea that you could draw that some of these guys might develop ornate crests, and so he'd whipped up this art of these Terrans that had different skull crests that are just kind of fabulous looking. I don't even know how to explain it, but you gotta go check it out. They have these completely different skull anatomies that are very distinctive, and so we had the idea that there's all these different subspecies. The one thing you did have about the Terrans in the original books is that they were sort of these religious fanatics, and we thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. There's not a lot of religion in Dark Sun, right? There's kind of elementals and there's Templars, but they're not really religious. And so the idea of having a people that are very devoutly religious on Dark Sun was an interesting idea that they didn't do much with. And so we kind of had the idea that despite these Terrans being very different morphologically, that they still had this common bond of this kind of strange, almost a monotheistic religion, which is very unusual which is actually pretty unusual. That they kind of believe there's one Earth Mother, no matter how different they are, and just develop kind of a whole set of ideas around that. And I think added a lot to the pretty sparse presentation that they got in the revised box set.
The initial illustration for the Terran also is just amazing. The one in the revised box set looks like, kind of this little guy who's sort of startled. He's got his arms out so you can see the vestigial folds from when they used to be gliders. But the guy in your book, before the head crest with the full body shot, dude in a loincloth with a spiky club, he just looks like he has seen some stuff. He is mean and ready to roll, and it really fits what I often think about in terms of art direction of if this is a character type that you want players to play, make them look awesome. Get players to look at this and go, oh my gosh, I want to play that dude. So you did a great service there. And then the different head crests, like that really opens the door to players customizing their appearance in interesting ways, being like, oh, my guy looks like this or like that. And, so all very cool visually, and then tying that into the idea of their Earth Mother cult that they have gives you a lot of juicy culture and society to work with. You've even got a sidebar about bonding with a Terrax so you can have your Pteranodon mount for these guys. So you really covered all bases.
Yeah, and again, I got to shout out this time Gabriel Eggers' art. He did they had these unique weapons that were described for Turan, but I don't think they were ever drawn. And he drew really cool versions of the weapons. And you almost want to play, these races just to do their weapons. And then Gabriel also did an awesome map of their homeland, the two towns, Turan Vale and Lost Scale, which are in the revised box set, but don't have any sort of regional maps. And did this really cool regional map of this area where they live, that has kind of terrain that you don't really see in Dark Sun, but obviously would have to be there. It kind of it visualizes valleys and hills and cliffs and a wadi, a dried out riverbed that sometimes fills with water, where the Turan Druids are trying to revive this valley. And the map is the map is so cool. Like, it makes you want to run a campaign where you go there and encounter these people and see what they're up to, because because the map is so good, it makes you want to run campaigns here.
Yeah, it really is. This whole section does really feel, like you said before, like this is the kind of stuff you would have expected to see if the Dark Sun line had continued under TSR's stewardship. These really fully fleshed out, fully realized ideas for what these people are like and how you're going to play them and how that plays into their behaviors and their ideas, and gives you ideas about what kinds of characters you're going to see and how they interact with the world. Just so well done.
All right, let's move on to
moving
the
on.
Yuan Ti.
No, I must take this one. The
right.
Yuan Ti, because I'm an enormous fan of snake cults. You know, a few years ago, they were just another snake cult. But yeah, we got the Yuan Ti, a race of serpent people who move into little cults that you guys call coils, the Listan Ti, and infiltrate into human societies. And of course, like many of the other species in this book, they come in a wide range of body types, but the Yuan Ti probably are the most diverse because they range all the way from nearly indistinguishable from humans if they're wearing the right clothes to giant serpents with claws, or dudes that are upright but have tails and big snake heads. They're all over the place. So tell us a little bit more about your Yuan Ti cult and where you see them being as like both villains and as potentially heroic players in Athos.
Yeah, there's two challenges with this one. Is that Yuan Ti were officially included in the original box set. It says, oh, this is a race that exists on Dark Sun. And then they got almost, like, I don't think they're featured in any adventure, or if they are, it's very minor. But they were featured in one of the old computer games, Wake of the Ravager. But very little, very little lore was ever developed for them. As a Dark Sun race. Obviously, in other worlds they exist, and there's more about them. And so we wanted to kind of reconfigure them and make them a little more Dark Sun. And so we did this a couple ways. I mean, one is in most worlds, I guess Yuan Ti kind of, they're their own people that they meet, they fall in love, they have babies, those babies are Yuan Ti. We wanted to do a different direction, where make it much more focused on the cult, where they're always trying to bring new people into the cult, but they can't reproduce the members themselves. They have to convince people to join. And so you have this kind of idea that they're always this insidious force wherever they have a presence, trying to convince people, hey, join our cult. We had the idea that you do it by ingesting their venom. And so they're almost kind of like drug dealers, low-level drug dealers, always trying to push their poison on people to get them open-minded so that they'll be willing to give this cult a try. And we had the idea, too, that the way they advance through their ranks in Dark Sun is actually maybe a psychometabolic psionic process. Maybe there's actually a little bit of life shaping behind what they're doing, that it's a very ancient practice. We even proposed an adventure hook where maybe you have to sneak into a Yuan Ti temple to understand what's going on with their metamorphosis. That like maybe a dragon or an Evangeline sends a party out to understand how the Yuan-ti do this transformation to inform their own transformation. Like make it a very Dark Sun race. But a lot of this is super unsuitable for player characters. Being like a diehard member of a cult who will do anything the cult tells you to do is totally incompatible with being a player character with free agency. So we had the idea that player characters, that player character Yuan-ti would mostly be some sort of exiles from their coils. So we call them Listan-ti, and they're people who have been thrown out of the coil for some or separated from their coil for some reason or another. So they have a degree of agency and can kind of make their own decisions and slot in with a party and, try to figure out what their life is going to be. I think a lot of the way you would play this is if you imagine just gotten out of a cult and just trying to figure out, okay, what is my life like now after I've spent 5 years in this cult? And so I think it opens up really interesting role-playing possibilities and ends up being a really fun, intriguing race.
I absolutely agree, 100%. I'm playing a Yuan-ti in your game, right, Robert? That's what I'm going to do? Yes?
Yeah, of course.
Or Listan-ti?
This was one of the races that I had very, very little to do with, and so I was just enjoying, as it was going on, just kind of reading everything because, it was just like, you always kind of imagine what conversations are like about this kind of exactly what we're talking about right now. And so like I was just able to sit there and appreciate and watch everybody talk about these different ideas. I remember when they were having the conversation about the what is it called, the seven-fold snake or whatever it is, and then the image that they got of that is amazing.
Yeah,
it's such a great image.
Yeah, a big 7-headed snake with coils below and additional heads, and then an emaciated aesthetic humanoid form. It's another magnificent piece of art. It obviously looks like something that you might see over in Southeast Asia, and it has immediate inspiration is, okay, you hand this out to your players, they're exploring some sort of ancient temple or whatnot, and they find this, and you see this enormous statue of, that's serious business. I personally love that you took the idea that the Yuan-ti are a metamorphic species, that they were human or humanoid, and then they got this other snake serpent stuff introduced into them, and now they've become sort of this fluid species. And this is not a new idea in Dark Sun, where the Pristine Tower has changed so many things. But they've been doing it for a long time, and they presumably, have a lot of wisdom and magical research about this whole business, and then connecting that directly with the idea that metamorphosis is at the heart of many of the advanced archetypes in Dark Sun: dragons, Evangelions, Pyrene, arguably. The Pyrene can take the form of any type of humanoid because they're uber druids, so they're transformers too. More than meets the eye. Can I say that without us getting sued? So connecting all of those dots means that suddenly the Yuan-ti cults are more than just like a mid-level enemy. They might have ancient wisdom that the PCs want to acquire or stop someone else from acquiring. And bing, adventure hook right there.
Yeah, they could be big bad evil guys. Like they're the head of the cult is that level of power.
Right? Yeah. If the head of the cult is going to go all Thulsa Doom and I'm going to metamorphose, but not into a dragon. I'm going to turn into the 7-headed snake and become this immense being of magical power that can shift between different kinds of humanoid and serpent forms. Then, obviously you want to stop that guy.
All right, so we've gone through the players section, and we are just going to really glaze over what's in the DM's guide, because there are a lot of really cool secrets in this. Each race is outlined. There's a history section, a kind of land section of where they live, some NPCs to use, some myths and legends, and then a few adventure hooks for each race.
Yeah, I mean, you see why the book ended up at 200 pages because you just start talking about these races. They're so fun. They're so dark sun. There's so many great ideas and themes that you can develop with them. It got to 200. It's 200 good pages.
Yeah, and again, shout out to Gabriel Eggers Evangian. The maps are amazing. They're so good.
They're fantastic, ranging from showing the locations of different Josel clans to the Strait of Arala, for the Tortle Underground, or Silt Warren Underground Warrens, and the just so many different kinds of useful maps giving you information about where you're going to find these characters, what their homes are like, and potentially even adventure sites if you decide to use one of these groups as antagonists.
We wanted to make a really useful book. You know, a lot of people get into Dark Sun and they love the lore of it and they kind of want to imagine different things that happen in the history, and that's cool stuff. But like, we wanted to make a book that was super useful that people could just grab and slot right into their campaigns and start playing with. And
Yeah.
we wanted to put a lot of stuff that people could really use. So that's why we put the maps, the encounter maps. Um, I see you have on your question list about the stats. We wrote the book edition neutral and then created appendices to do the stats if you were playing second edition, third edition, or fifth edition. We hope someone can come along and do a fourth edition version for us as well. But if you're playing any of those three editions, you could grab this book and immediately put it in your campaign, I hope, and really get a lot out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really comprehensive, edition, inclusive, and I did see your little note about, like, please, if you know fourth edition, help.
Yeah, so I was going to I was gonna try to do it, and so I had done the fifth edition ones, and then I was like, okay, that didn't take me that long. This will be quick too. And then I
How hard
started,
could it be?
yeah, then I started looking back at fourth edition stuff, and the problem is that with every fourth edition race, like there's like a bunch of powers that you have to make up for different things that they can do. And so I was just, not steeped enough in fourth edition lately to just bang that out. And I was just like, I just can't do this.
Yeah, it's very comprehensive though, going over, all of your ability modifiers, ages, class selection for second edition, um, and then going all the way to the bonus additional proficiencies, and then you've got your third edition versions with how this like interacts with your feat selection, and uh, gray traits, different heritages, um, additional weapons. There's like a couple of minor things that were like omitted, but almost everything is there. Um, it is really made for, like, hey, if you want to put these in your game, here it is. Boom. Second edition, third edition, fifth edition, just do it.
It ends up being pretty hard to write edition neutral content because you don't. I mean, first of all, I'm a kind of a 2e guy. I've played 5e, but I'm mostly a 2e guy, and there's just considerations in the mechanics that have to influence kind of some of the ways you describe things. Like
Mhm.
we had a really challenging discussion about how to deal with lizard folk holding their breath. How long should they be able to hold their breath?
Right.
Yeah.
And the different editions have such different versions of breath holding mechanics, and it's like if you say they can hold their breath an hour, that seems crazy in third edition, but it seems okay in fifth edition. And they live in an underwater city, so surely they can hold their breath for a while. And so like things like this are really ended up being actually very challenging to sort through. It took a ton of time. I mean, we probably wrote the main part of the book in about a year, and then spent 6 months having to hash out all these things that we didn't even realize were complicated landmines.
Oh, you
Yeah.
even have a table for water consumption, which is fantastic, with like a reference of humans use this much, half giants use this much, and then here's how much each of your different reptile types uses. So, chef's kiss.
Yeah, thank you. It was a labor of love for everybody involved, I think.
Yeah.
Was this the first project that you like been a producer, a coordinator on?
Well, I did one of the adventures for Adventures in the Deadlands that is coming out, I think, sometimes next year. That's going to be a super cool anthology of adventures. Again, like my interest is in doing stuff that's pretty useful for people, and so these are just off the shelf adventures where you can go into the Deadlands and explore that and figure out what to do with that part of the world. So I wrote one of those. That was kind of my first foray into it, and this was my first big project, and just thrilled with the way it came out and how much fun it was to work with the community on something like this. I mean, it's the most fun I've had with the hobby since like my first experience playing the game in high school. I've played a few times since high school, and even on some campaigns that lasted a while and stuff. But this was more fun, to be honest, than all but the very best of playing experiences.
So, what were some of the hurdles that you had while putting all of this together, the creative challenges? And if someone else were to say, "Hey, I'm going to do a book," what sort of landmines should I watch out for? What would you tell them?
Well, we wanted to be really respectful of everything that was already out there, not only in second edition, fifth edition. The, Athos.org did a book, Terrors of Athos, that created some basic stats for some of these races as PCs, and then fans over the years have contributed a lot of ideas too. And so the thing that's hard that we spend a lot of time on was trying to be respectful and to incorporate all these ideas that had been out there. It'd be a lot easier to just, bulldoze everything and start fresh. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have kind of like respect, stand on the shoulder of the people that came before us to create something that is really cool and that really fits in with everyone's versions of Athos that they've been playing with. And that's really hard to do because there's different ideas out there, and you kind of have to sit down and figure out, like, okay, how can we, reconcile these totally different takes on these races in some cases. And that's the hard part. If you want to be respectful of everything that came before you, it takes a lot of consideration, and it ends up being a lot of fun. You read these things so closely and think about them in a whole new way. And I think everybody who is involved in the project, and I hope most people who read the book, are just excited to think about how they could play the game with these races. They're just so, like, I mean, I keep going back to it, but they're just so Dark Sun. They're just classic Dark Sun tropes all throughout this that would be so fun to have in a campaign.
Absolutely.
Spent a year and a half doing this. What do you think could be, like, what would be a follow-up to Scale, Tail, and Claw? Like, what would you do if you maybe wrote an adventure with these things, or like what could you see happening?
There have been some ideas kicked around about an adventure that ties a lot of these species together. Basically, the idea that these guys engage with the world in a different way. And so maybe, you do an adventure where you have to go deep into the desert, and you need, Nicole to introduce you to Surans, and you need Surans to introduce you to Turtles, and you need the Turtles to get you across the silt to you encounter the silt runners, and then you have to get to a Wanti temple and take it out. Like, kind of that kind of adventure we've talked about, or, certainly someone could develop that on their own. The other thing that we're kind of thinking of as a next project is we had this idea that a lot of these subspecies are from different places on Athos, not only the tablelands, but they have a presence outside of the tablelands. And so there's some cool ideas about what some of these other regions of the world look like. I always think about that Valley of Dust and Fire map that had these two little land masses in the corner of the map. And so you know it's canon that there's something else out there, and you die. I was always intrigued, wanting to know what that is. And so we put some of those lizard peoples on those land masses, and now I think a lot of people are excited about the idea of creating some really high quality maps that develop. There's old maps that have been out there for a long time on the Athasian Cartographers Guild website, and there's a lot of momentum, I think, around developing some of those maps and having these lizard peoples play a role there, and lots of new ideas about extending the map with some of this stuff. I think that's a cool direction of development.
So, speaking of those sorts of extensions, how has the community responded so far to this? You've gotten a fair number of page views and downloads already, over 1,000. Have you seen any surprising responses from players yet, or encouraging feedback?
The feedback has been great. I mean, first of all, everybody just loves the art. Yeah, I felt the whole time though that even if the writing was bad, the art was going to be so good that it was going to be a project worth doing. I'm really just in awe of the creativity of the guys that did the art on this, and people have been absolutely loving the art. I've been really gratified that a lot of people were who've read it were really excited about the idea of the turtles. That was kind of a dicey one, we felt like, because it's not at all in the Dark Sun canon. But people really understood the vision and really liked that. And I think several people have said they want to use that in their campaigns. And so that's super cool to have kind of won people over that this was worth doing. And people have just said that several people have said, and this was the goal, was that they want to find a way to play Dark Sun with some of these races. And the most gratifying thing of all would be to see people, just using the book to actually play their games.
And is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like the fans to know, or anything of favorite of yours?
No, I mean there's so much in there. Just check it out. There's so many great adventure hooks, where we kind of just proposed the nub of an adventure in one paragraph. So many good ideas in there. Like, I'm just kind of like dying to run a campaign again and start going through those adventures, because they introduce just whole new ways to engage with the Dark Sun world. Some of the adventure ideas are so creative. That's one of the favorite parts. That, like, you could some of these ideas are so good. You could just talk through. You could do a whole podcast talking through how fun some of these ideas are.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think we've talked about everything, and we're only a little over an hour, so that's not too bad.
All right.
I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Giff, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's really a pleasure. I've been such a fan of this podcast. It inspired so many of the ideas that we had in this book. There were so many things from the interviews that you'd done with the original creators that helped kind of focus us on, how do you keep this feeling Dark Sun? So, been a big fan of the podcast for years. It's really a delight to be here talking Dark Sun.
Oh, we're having a Dark Sun bromance here.
You talking about that. I was amazed when I kind of was looking at one of the, like when Jack had put out like the first PDF of it for real, and I was looking at it, and like I hadn't read that part about Troy's quote, and so I thought that was so cool. They pulled a quote from Troy about the races, and put it there from one of the podcasts. So I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, if you know him, right, Robert? You should send this. You need to send him this book and tell him that he inspired this.
I've already sent it to him and Tim, and he said he was reading it, and so I expect I'll get some kind of quote back about it.
Yeah, tell him he has to write a book report.
Yeah, nice. All right, well, Giff, where can people find you online?
I'm on the Arena. I'm on Reddit. All over the Dark Sun Reddit. I'm one of the moderators there, actually, and on the Discords. So, I've just always loved this campaign setting, and always loved just thinking about it and talking about it. And so, you can find me there.
And what's your username usually?
I am Giff.
There you go. All right, Jesse, where can we find you online?
You'll find me as Jesse Heinig over on Facebook in the Dark Sun group and on Blue Sky. I occasionally pop into Reddit from time to time, mostly to lurk, and I spend way too much time on the Dark Sun Discord. And what about you, Robert?
Oh, all those same places. All those same places. Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time in the Dark Sun Discord too. A lot of great conversations have been happening there. A lot of great conversations in the Facebook group too. So yeah, I've not been getting a lot done except for writing about Dark Sun. But I'm about to start Dregoth Ascending for 5th edition. So if anyone wants to play that, I have a group of players that have been playing for a long time. They are 14th level, so it's going to start at 14th level. The one thing I got to kind of figure out is how to get the events that are happening in Dregoth Ascending, which are in free year 11, how to get those events to work with like a free year 3 timeline. So I'm gonna have to do some gymnastics to figure that out. But yeah, so go check that out on startplaying.games. It's called Dregoth Ascending, so you should be able to find it if you want to join. And that's going to be on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of the month. I've also got a weekly Dark Sun game that I could use some more players on, and that is like a 5 o'clock Pacific time, and that's also that is a City State of Tier game. So that's where I'm at. All right, and that's going to wrap it up for us, folks. Thank you, everyone.
See y'all again next time.
Bye.